Hi, I'm James Harvey Johnson. Most people call me Jim. I want to take you on an adventure today, show you how I create my images and also how I create platinum palladium prints. So we open the image and we need to now make adjustments to that image based upon your vision. Everyone has a different vision. So that's where the editing process occurs. This is a digital darkroom. A regular darkroom, you accomplish the same thing, except it's under a red light and you have the negative being projected onto a surface of going to be paper, and you make changes to that, or you can make changes as the light hits the paper, or you can make changes to that the way that the negative is even made with the chemicals that are used to develop the negative in a analog darkroom. We can do some of these same things, well, most of these same things in a digital darkroom. And so that is the whole purpose of editing it. And in my case, it's making the image as best as it can possibly be based upon my experience. This is Adobe Bridge, Adobe's browser for evaluating images that one has captured. And today we're going to work on an image and carry it all the way through to making a platinum palladium print. The one in the upper right hand corner is a JPEG in monochrome. I set up my camera in which the camera will, and what I see through the viewfinder will be just like that in monochrome. For me, evaluating an image is easier when you're not having to worry with color. And then when I make the exposure, it'll capture the JPEG in monochrome and also a RAW file in color. So the RAW file has more information and it's easier to adjust it. So this is the color image of that same one, and I'm going to open it and to set the different parameters within the exposure. So you can see this is a tree and a really nice buck and rail, split rail fence from Washington on the Brazos. So I'm going to look at it a little bit. I'm going to go down this column here, which is basically all the things that will happen here on this column will be global. It'll affect the whole entire image. So I'll look at the histogram, which is this thing on the right up here, and it shows the luminance also in red, green, and blue, the white being luminosity. So basically this is because it encompasses the entire range here, you get all the information, nothing's blocked out. So we'll make some little adjustments and could drop the exposure down just a little bit. And I'm going to add a little contrast. But it's some of these things are very subtle. In the highlights, I like to take some of the brightness out of the clouds. Again, very, very subtle. And the shadows would affect the area in the tree where the darkest areas are. And I like to be able to see into those shadows. So I'll move that slider until I can begin to see the tree trunk, which would be right in here. The other thing to do is to set the white point and black point, which would basically set it from here on this histogram from here to here. So moving down to this slider, and I'll blacken the screen, and I'll move that until I just see a white dot. And right up there in the corner, you can see it just as it appears. That sets the white point, and then the black point is pretty much the same thing. Just do it in reverse. Just as I begin to see the black point. The next thing coming down would be texture, which would add a little more definition and can see that a little better if I enlarge this. And so I move this slider to texture, and it would, again, say very subtle. It's hard, probably be hard to see, but I can see it. And then the clarity slider does a little bit too, that too. So essentially that's the far as I would go with this. And if I was going to take this, say, to color, I might add, assume it's not, I'm going to convert this to black and white, so it won't matter. Assuming I'm taking it to a color image, I might add just a touch more vibrance. And vibrance, the vibrance slider, what that does is adds a little bit more color in things that are a little bit undersaturated. So I'm not going to saturate anything more, and actually with this slider here. So the next stage is to run with this, all this global adjustments on this image. So I'm going to go and open it in Photoshop. All will be done globally to this image, not anything specific, tiny specifics. So I think it needs a little exposure, and it's very subtle, but I want to show you what the slider does. That's overexposed, and that's underexposed. So the histogram shows it's pretty good, but I think it could use just a little bit. And I always like to add a little contrast. And so what contrast would do, that's extreme either way. No contrast, too much contrast, and just a touch of contrast. And highlights would be the brightest part in the histogram. That's going to be over here, the far right. And so I like to, in the brightest part of this image are the clouds, and so I'm going to, if I push it all the way, you can see it brightens the sky, which is the other way, darkens the sky. In fact, that's not too bad right there. It's a little more than I had originally. Shadows does the darker parts, and in this case, you'd open up a little bit too much, because the shadows here would be around the tree, under the tree trunk, and that's too much. So I want to be able to look at it visually and be able to see a little detail. Always you can think about this is that when you're outside and you see a dark shadow, are you going to step into that dark shadow without knowing what's in there? Or like a cave, for instance, a dark cave, it's got a shadowed. Most people want to be invited into the shadow, so that's why I open that up. And then the next area here is the setting the white point and the black point, and that sets it having to do with the histogram being white being over here and dark being over here. I don't want it being too much, and so I can push options on my Mac, a computer, push that down, and if I move this, it'll darken the screen and allow the white point to appear. You can see it at the very top. Same thing with the black point, push it again, makes the screen go black when I touch the black slider, and I just move it to where I can just see black on the white screen. And textures, it's best to see that if I enlarge this, say 200%. And if I move texture, this is very subtle. I mean, I can see it changing some of the fine detail on these tree branches. And see, that takes it out, and that puts too much. So just a touch there. So some clarity does somewhat the same way, except I'm going to move it the other way too. I like to add, a little bit more clarity to that, and then go back to fitting the image into the screen. If it was going to be a color image, then you could adjust vibrance, and the vibrance slider adds saturation, a little more color in those colors that are in the raw image that weren't as bright, and so I just added a touch there, and I think the saturation is fine. I'm not going to touch that. At this stage, we'll go to Photoshop. So hit this button and it'll open the image in Photoshop. So there it is in Photoshop. You know, if I was going to print this, and just like the image is right now, it looks pretty good to me. If you look down on the lower left-hand corner, I've opened a window because I like to continue to look at the histogram. So it's showing the colors, and then in this particular case, I'm going to move it to just luminosity. So I'm looking at the histogram here, the luminosity from black on the left to white on the right. Now, when I'm evaluating this image, say this image was going to be in the exhibition, just as it is. It's on a white background. So you need to compensate for an image being surrounded by white. So when I do that, adding a little bit of exposure to the image. And if you look down at the histogram, it's going to move. And you can see I added just a little bit of exposure to compensate for that white background. Let's see if I can, I don't think it changed the color of the background. Anyway, I'll click on this layers palette here, and you can see what happens when it goes from, when I click it on and off. It's very subtle. But when it's printed, that will definitely make a difference. If I printed it like that, it'd be just a tad, to me, a tad too dark. Okay, so at this stage, you can go and you have an image ready to print. And basically, with Photoshop, you come up here to this file and hit print, and that'll open up a whole dialog of things to adjust in the printer if you were going to print it in color. So we're not going to do that, and we're going to make this a platinum palladium print. So I'm going to flatten it. So it's going to take these layers out of here. So I'm working with a completely new palette. The image is the same. I've made all of the adjustments visually to this color image. So now at this stage of the game, I'm going to look at it at a little bit different rate. I have another plug-in program within Photoshop, and this is going to I'm going to build a map, which is going to show the tonal ranges from, like Ansel Adams talks about, in tones from 0 to 10, meaning dark to light, and it'll actually show you what these are. So you can see this now is looking at this image, and it's got all of the tones from 0 to 10, and so you can see that the area up here where it's white, that's blown out. It's past 10. And what I would like to do is, and nothing I can do to really recover that. I mean, there's no information there. So what I can adjust, some of these brighter areas here, the yellow, orange, and red in this image. And so since we're going to do it in black and white, and it could be, this could also work for the color as well. So here we're talking about these zones, zone 0 to zone 10. So if I select with this particular program, the brighter areas are zone 8, 9, and 10. So I select 8, and it'll make these little marching ants. It selects that. Let's select 9, does the same thing. Select 10, does the same thing. So all these little dots on the image are selection, but I want to feather that selection, so I'll pick feather 25, and then I'm going to come down to a blank levels layer, which will allow me to adjust the image by this palette here, or this custom levels palette. So if I move this, the thing I'm moving right now, right, this little arrow in the middle, that's midtones. You can see if I'm moving it back and forth, you can see it's changing those midtones. If I move this, that's the little arrow thing at the pyramid at the right, it's changing the highlights. And the highlights are okay. And we can move the dark end. It doesn't, it'll make it a little bit better. And I like a little definition in the clouds, and so something like that looks pretty good to me. So the next step is to see what this looks like as a black and white. So I can take this same plug-in in Photoshop and go up here and say easy black and white. Now that makes it back to black and white. Now I can make some adjustments here, and so I've got here, open that, and I want to adjust. The midtones are usually the things that get affected, and I want to take those highlights down there. Okay, so that's what it would look like. That's the potential that you have looking at this as a positive image, but we need to make it a negative. So I have to get my cheat sheet out so I don't make a mistake. I have a list of things I need to do to convert this into a negative. Because this is a little more of a complicated part. So anyway, I've adjusted this image to, made all of the global adjustments, and there's nothing really any fine detail in this that I need to make right at the moment that I could do. I mean, I could show one thing to do here is just go down to this layer here, the background layer, and I'm going to duplicate that layer so I'm not working on that. I can delete it. But if I wanted to, say, open these shadows and maybe put a little bit more emphasis on this split buck and rail fence before we go any further, I can take what we do like in a regular darkroom, working with a negative, and if the negative is being projected onto, you're going to do some what's called dodging and burning. So I have a little, Photoshop gives us a little tool, and this right here is, you have a dodge tool, looks like a little, like a magnifying glass, and then a burn tool. So dodging keeps light from getting to the paper. Burning allows it more light. So in this particular case, we wanted to maybe open up the shadows a little, maybe a tad more on this tree. So I'm going to use the dodge tool, and it's going to be in the shadows. And then this, again, this can be a very subtle. I have the exposure set at about 9%. You want to start out very, very, sometimes I even do it less than that, because each time you move your brush or your pen, it does something to it. So I'm going to just come right down in here, in this area here, and see kind of in this dark, and it's only affecting the dark. It won't affect anything else. So I'm going to click here and see. You don't really see a whole lot changing there, so we need to increase the exposure a little bit. Okay, I can see very subtly a little bit more detail right in there. tree trunk. So that's that. Maybe I like this buck and rail, split rail fence, and I want to emphasize that. I'm sorry, go back to it. So here we have, it's mostly midtones and lights. So if I select midtones and right up here, and then I want to go back down a little bit, and I just run my cursor over those areas. Some I might do a little bit brighter. So most of these things can be a very subtle change. And the reason I'm doing this is to draw your eye to that area. So I'm going to now, they did the midtones of those, and I'm going to now come back and do the highlights, and these can be a little bit stronger, because it's actually only affecting the highlight in that I'm painting over. And I can see it is having an effect there. And then I can click on that. Let's see, it goes off, on. So it draws your eye to that. There's one other thing that we can do to this image that, again, it's all to draw your eye into, because the story here is this springtime, and this tree does not have any leaves on it, and you can see through the tree. You can see this field on the other side of the tree, and the tree has a magnificent shape, and in the foreground the fence. So sometimes another thing that I like to do is to add a vignette. So again, it forces, so again, a subtle thing, but forces you to look into a specific part of the image. And I like to do, and I have another program I can plug into called Plug-in, and it's exposure. It'll open up a completely different screen. Now it doesn't see it as a monochrome. That's okay. I'm going to add this. There's a vignette program here, and it'll come down to the black, and it's subtle black. And I have a little thing here I can put that where I want exactly the vignette, the center of to be. And it's sort of the tree. It's pretty obvious. And it doesn't look like it did anything until activated. Okay, so there's the layer, and I'll click, there it is, on, and it is off. We can adjust because of the compensation, it did add a little more darkness to the overall image, but I can fix that with one more step before we completely convert this to a grayscale. That's going to add another, again, to compensate for the white. I've made it a little bit darker. Again, I'm looking down here at the luminosity window, and I just move that until that histogram comes a little bit more to the right. Okay, now that looks really good. That's very nice. Okay, so if you were to stop here, you could print this as a inkjet digital black and white image. But what we're going to do is make it a platinum palladium. So there's up to the stage of making it a platinum palladium. So you edit it just as if however you want it. So before I do that, I'm going to save this. because I've got to flatten it. I'm going to save it in the file as a Photoshop file. It's going to be saved, and it'll be there to work on later. But to proceed with this, I need to flatten all these layers. And let that finish its saving. Okay, so we need to go to convert this to grayscale. So I'm here to image and mode and hit grayscale. Well, that's converted this completely to a grayscale image. The next step we make to determine the size of this image that's going to be printed. So go down to image size. I want the printer to print it at 360 dpi, and we'll make this image just as it is right now. It could be a 20 by 30. You know, it's a big print. So for Platinum Palladium, I can't make it out of the paper. I don't have a printer, a exposure box, as you'll see later, that big. So I'm going to have to make it fit the paper I have. So I'm going to make it 6 by 9. Now you can get a little bit a better sense of the what happens to how white affects this image. So we set the DPI, got the image size set. So now I'm going to add a curve which is going to be specific for making a Platinum Palladium. Okay, so that is this curve, and you can look at this screen here, and that's a curve, but it's a specific, has to do with the darks and lights and all that for this process. So I got that part done. The next thing, we want to invert this image, so they're going to make it look like a negative. So there is on the computer screen what the negative would look like. So now we're going to turn on the printer. Okay, we need to print this negative that we've just made, so we need to go into Photoshop and talk to the printer. I'm going to go over to File, and move up down to this Print, and dialog is going to come up. And I'll refer to my cheat sheets. So one thing I need to do here is, before we do that, is minimize this, cancel right now. One step that I have to part. That's why I have this, and we've almost made a mistake here. I have to flip this image. If you think about it, if I print it on paper right now, make a negative and print it on paper, I'm going to get the reverse of that image. But I don't want the reverse. I wanted to see it just like this, so I have to to flip this image. So that was a mistake. That's why it's easy to do. Let's see, image rotation. Flip canvas horizontal. Okay. Now, you come back to Print, When I do this all the time, I haven't done this in a while, so that's why I wanted to make sure. You got to open up this dialogue, and so we're talking about the Photoshop print settings and the printer setup. So obviously have the printer is selected. This is an Epson Stylus Pro 3880, and this printer is dedicated just to making negatives, and I have another printer over there I use for color. So I'm going to come down here, and printer manages colors. I'm going to print settings. Right, I'm going to have to use an 8.5 by, it'll be 8.5 by 11. We're going to print this on Pictorico overhead projector paper, film, not paper, film. Color matching. Epson controls the colors. This, if you wanted to focus on this Pictorico paper, you see this. I'm pointing here, the paper that's left, this tab right here. That's the way it goes loaded into the computer. Because you want there's two surfaces to this. One is slick and one of it has a surface that will collect the ink. So when you load the paper, you load it into with that, just like that, with that tab right there. So it would go like this in here. In this particular printer, I have to do it very slowly. It'll go through ramifications and then it'll tell me if it's loaded properly. Okay, it's ready to go. See the little screen there, it says ready. So now I'll go back, come back over here, and I'll come back to the right screen. So here's the printer Photoshop, ready to go, it's ready. I always double check all these things and then hit print. So it comes down, the little dialog opens at the bottom of the screen, you can see it in the printer, and it starts talking to the printer. This is the slick side. If you printed it like this, you would have an inky mess. That will not stick, and that'll just be all liquid if you print it on that side. On this side, it'll adhere to that. Okay, so the negative is dry. Got the paper out, which is handmade Hahnemühle platinum rag paper. There's no chemicals in this paper. Anyway, I'm going to lay the negative over the paper and make some excuse me, registration marks to align the negative up with properly over the dried platinum palladium that has been placed on the paper. So basically I just lift up the edge of the negative and come over, look at the corner, and just make a little L in the corner of that negative. So we made one mark on the registration mark on the paper outlining the corners of the negative. So I'll do that one. Make sure I need lined up. I'll put this on there to keep the paper from moving, or the negative from moving. And I'll come over and do this other side. I obviously want to keep fingers away from this emulsion side of this negative. And it's easy to move it out of position, so get it lined up again. Actually, look at this one here. Okay, so take this off. And the next step is I need to get this box. And we know the size of the negative. As I've said before, a platinum palladium print is dictated by the size of the negative. In the 1870s up through, say, 1915, when this process was in vogue, before the silver process of black and white prints came out, this was the way all black and white prints were done, and the size of the print that you see is the size of the negative. So if you have an 8 by 10 image size, the negative was 8 by 10. The camera was huge. I've got one that I bought from a friend of mine, a print, and the image size is 14 by 20. The camera was big enough to accommodate a 14 by 20 negative. So we know that this image size is 6 by 9. So I have a little chart that I made that tells me, based upon, because you can't remember this stuff, you have to be constantly thinking of it, how many drops of each of the solution that are going to go into that shot glass. But before I do that, I have that set out, I record, in this case, this image size is 6 by 9, so we have, this is to record it in case I wanted to do another one of these, 14 drops of palladium, 14 drops of ferric oxalate. We go 3 to 4 drops. I'll usually if you go a little bit more, it'll be a little bit darker. We can go with, say, 3 drops of platinum, and then 1 drop of tween, which is a dispersal agent. So next stage is this was developed in the potassium oxalate at 140 degrees Fahrenheit. This is a platinum palladium print. The paper is Han Mule, German paper, platinum rag. The humidity in this room right now is 51%, and the room temperature is 65. And we do the date, it's the 19th, and exposure time 5 minutes. So that's recorded on the paper for posterity, and so the next step is to put these solutions in this shot glass. Let's see here. I need to get these in the right order. Okay, Palladium. I have some extras here. This can be very, very confusing. Okay, this is the Palladium solution. Okay, and I basically put a dropper full, and then, so we're talking 14 drops. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Get that out of the way. And the next one is ferric oxalate. And ferric oxalate is the chemical that allows the reaction to occur between platinum and palladium and the ultraviolet light. So we have 14 drops of this. I want to look at it again. Ferric oxalate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. This is the most expensive bottle in this box. And this is sodium platinum solution. And the bottle costs $200. So you don't want to make very many mistakes. Fortunately, it has the least amount used. So 3 to 4 drops, and whether you use 3 or whether you use 4 is going to dictate maybe the contrast that you might have. And since this image has some good contrast, we're just going to use 3. So I do 1, 2, 3. And the next solution is tween, and it's a dispersal agent. It just allows all those things to disperse on the paper, and sort of like a wetting agent in some respects. So this just basically, I just let it swirl it around a little bit, and then I get the paper, and the next is the brush. What I do here is just make sure that brush is got. I can show you. This is distilled water, and I just dip it into the distilled water and blot it out like that. You don't want it too wet, or you don't want it too dry. It'll absorb all the chemicals. So I just keep touching it till it kind of, I don't see any wetness on that. So I'm getting ready here. This will take 2 or 3 minutes. And swirl this solution around. And I'm going to just dump it right on the paper. And basically, it's just make an even distribution. And the platinum palladium on this, making sure that I go past these registration marks. When somebody's learning, this is the part that they just is the really you get the most worried about. I'm going to let the brush strokes, I'm not going to block this one off, I'm going to let the brush strokes go past the registration marks, and when we print it, and you will see that this is a handmade print, and you'll have a little bit of the brush marks on the paper. keep doing it till that is somewhat completely dispersed and I don't get many marks pooling. I guess to begin it pooling like this right here on the top edge. That'll one more time, and that should be sufficient. You can see that the paper has a yellowish cast to it. Okay, that's enough. You stick this in there. If I was going to be doing more, now take this print. You can see I can tilt it back and forth. It's wet. And let the sheen. Can you see it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then I have a little box over here with some screens on it. And I just set that paper in there and let it sit in the dark for 15-20 minutes. So emulsion side down. And so you can see on the video there the little marks, and I just go over here and line up the corners that I had marked previously. I actually think it's a little bit off, and adjust it. It's even. Okay, I'm going to walk over here, and I'll let you get adjusted.
Where are we going?
Right here.
We're going right here.
Before I do that, I'm going to wipe that out of there. And it's under pressure from these springs, pushing it against that even more. And then it gets put in this printing. Okay, so we put it in here. We'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When I pull it out, I'll be moving down there. But anyway, when I pull it out, show the girl, I'll hold it. You can stay right there and look at it. There will be kind of a ghost image, very faint ghost image on the paper. So, so you can see it. You won't be able to see the complete image, but you'll see that there's been some changes made. Basically just a reverse of the process. See? Watch what happens. It's all instantaneous. Isn't that cool? All will be done globally to this image, not anything specific, tiny specifics. So I think it needs a little exposure, and it's very subtle, but I want to show you what the slider does. That's overexposed, and that's underexposed. So, you know, the histogram shows it's pretty good, but I think it could use just a little bit. And I always like to add a little contrast. And so what contrast would do, that's extreme either way. No contrast, too much contrast, and just a touch of contrast. And highlights would be the brightest part in the histogram. That's going to be over here, the far right. And so I like to, in the brightest part of this image are the clouds, and so I'm going to, if I push it all the way, you can see it brightens the sky, which is the other way, darkens the sky. In fact, that's not too bad right there. It's a little more than I had originally. Shadows does the darker parts, and in this case, you know, you'd open up a little bit too much, because the shadows here would be around the tree, under the tree trunk, and that's too much. So I want to be able to look at it visually and be able to see a little detail. Always, you can think about this, is that when you're outside and you see a dark shadow, are you going to step into that dark shadow without knowing what's in there? Or like a cave, for instance, a dark cave, it's got a shadowed. Most people want to be invited into the shadow, so that's why I open that up. And then the next area here is the setting the white point and the black point, and that sets it having to do with the histogram being white being over here and dark being over here. I don't want it being too much, and so I can push options on my Mac, a computer, push that down, and if I move this, it'll darken the screen and allow the white point. See what I'm saying? When you look at it wet, you can see it at the very top. Same thing with the black. You see the image wet. It won't look like when that glistening drug goes off of there. That's why you have to wax it to get it. So basically, if you come in, you can see this is good, you know, pretty good light. That's the image. It came out just like I wanted it to. You know, the highlights on this rail are good, and I can see into the shadow of that tree trunk. So basically, you know, that's it. And it just washes for 30 minutes. So, you know, basically I put this tape on there so that the negative doesn't slide. And so it's the emulsion side against the paper. And I'll lay it down like that. Then I put this little mat board there on top of it, which actually helps to press that against that paper. I want it to be totally attached to it. Not attached, but pressed against it. So then put this spring-loaded device, which has got the felt backing on it here, which also adds to compressing it, the sandwich. And then the spring, this is very tight, and it's got slots in the edge of this which catch the spring and holds it against that, and then goes in like that. And then where you have your sandwiched print, and then it can go in here. And I like to, you know, do the waxing right after that, because the paper is warm and it allows it to disperse better. Turn this off. So see how flat it is. very simple to do. And basically, and I just use my finger like that. You could use a cloth, but I just use my finger and then start. If you want to, you can come, get a real kind of a close-up. I'll start with an area that will definitely show you a difference. I'm going to start right here, and watch what happens to the darks.
Oh, wow.
You see it?
Mm-hmm.
I usually just kind of start off like this, and then I'll reflect it and see if places that I've missed. What I'll do is I'll say maybe like do half of it, and then we can get a good image of the video, and you definitely can see a difference. Some little places, there's like a little white spot there that I probably had something. I can touch that up with some. I have a series of colored pencils, but you see that little white spot right there?
Yeah.
I can fix that.
It was just something on the...
Yeah, probably something on the, but that, almost all of them do have
a
some.
little spot or something.
But I that's easily fixed. I have a series of art grade colored pencils that different, 5 or 6 shades of gray. Okay, I did this half. Wow, it's really, really pretty. Okay, so next is just buffing. And sort of get it'll kind of smooth it out. And see, I didn't miss any spots. You can see how it looks like it just after it's been applied, and you reflect it. You can sort of see finger swirls and marks, and
the buffing just
when the buffing will kind of take those out, and it'll just smooth it out. This is the best print I've done this year.
Really?
In 2021. Yeah, see it? There, it's ready. Now let's go outside and look at it. Well, this is the finished print, and brought it outside to look at it in natural light without the influence of the artificial lighting inside, and this is the way, very similar lighting that art should be exhibited in a gallery setting. So we look forward to seeing this on the wall.